the woods and the darkness and the snow and the depth of the wood, dark and deep? Does that represent some kind of mystery that he doesn't have in his normal life?
Welcome to the Stories Cafe podcast, the espresso version of Stories Cafe, offering quick, enriching moments of reflection on literature, cinema, archetypes, philosophy, and the art of living deliberately. Just like a perfectly crafted espresso at a Parisian cafe, each episode is a brief pause for you to submerge yourself in something invigorating and fulfilling. I'm Annette Wernblad, course creator, internationally published author, and wanderer at heart. So, cozy up as we explore the powerful world of stories, how they shape our lives, and teach us the art of living deliberately.
So this poem that I want to share with you is called Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. It was written by Robert Frost in 1923, and just as he said with The Road Not Taken, it took him a very short time to write it. And a lot of the time his poems are deceptively simple, is that it seems like, oh, that's very nice. But then if you go in and look at how deeply philosophical they actually are, you get so much more out of them. So I'm just going to read it for you, and then we're going to go back and look at it. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. You will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Even if we just take it at surface value, I think this is one of the most beautiful poems ever. Stopping by woods on a snowy evening. Can you picture that image? The horse and the snow and the woods, and he stops and he wants to perhaps go in or to dive deeper into those woods, but he has to go back. It's very clear that there's more to the words themselves than just painting that picture. So I think the interesting thing with a lot of Frost poetry, it doesn't appear that there is a riddle, that there is anything to solve. But if you look a little closer, you realize that there's more to it. So where is the first time that we notice, okay, there's got to be more to this than just there's a man and there's a wood and he has a horse and there's snow. It is the darkest evening of the year. So it takes place at winter solstice, which is some magical night. So if we go to the end of the poem again, and miles to go before I sleep, and then the repetition, and miles to go before I sleep. And I guarantee you that he didn't write that twice just because he couldn't think of anything else. So the question then becomes, as you get to the end of the poem, you realize, you know what, there's got to be more to it than this, because why else would he repeat that line, and miles to go before I sleep? And miles to go before I sleep. He jumps out of realism when he repeats that line. Look at the rhyme scheme. I think that in itself is fascinating, is that you have each stanza is composed of 4 lines, and you have line 1, 2, and 4 that rhyme. No, though, and snow. But then the third line doesn't rhyme with anything. But the word ending the third line makes up the rhyme pattern for the next stanza. So here, queer, near, and year. And then you have lake that doesn't rhyme with anything. But lake then becomes the rhyme scheme of the next stanza. Shake, mistake, and flake. And then you have sweep, which becomes deep, keep, sleep, sleep. So again, an exception in that last one because the last line is repeated twice. So let's look at it a little more carefully with all those things in mind. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch the woods fill up with snow. Right there in that first stanza, you have a contradiction between two things, namely the woods and the village. And whoever owns the woods, his house is in the village. So he will not see me because he is in the village. And the implication is, so should you be. You know, anybody in their right mind on the darkest night of the year would actually be in the village, perhaps in his bed. There's an indication that it's kind of late at night. But he's not. The speaker is not in the village. The speaker is out on his horse. We don't know where he's been. We assume that where he's going is the village. But the fact is that right now, is you remember the road not taken, that whole idea is that you have a situation of a person standing by a road, and that's what the poem is about. He's probably going, I would assume, to the village, you know, promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. So the conflict here is between whatever it is the woods represent and whatever it is the village represents. So I would suggest that the village represents civilization, the man-made structure of a town, a village. The woods are enticing somehow, aren't they? And the idea is that he will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. So he will not see me stopping here because he's in the village and I'm here. And there's something in the woods that tempts the speaker to stay. The woods are enticing. There's something alluring and magical and mystical about the woods as opposed to the village. And it's snowing. And it's probably snowing quite a lot if the woods would fill up with snow. There is something slightly ominous in the woods fill up with snow, that sense of if the speaker were to stay there long enough snow would fall almost like a blanket, and that would be dangerous. And I think it is worth thinking about, is that what allures him? Is that what attracts him to stay there? The comfort and safety of the village as opposed to the woods filling up with snow. So then he even admits that my little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. So the question is, why are we stopping here? Because there's something so tempting about the woods. Between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. Again, the magic of that evening. You know, I've talked about that a lot, about the magic of the winter solstice. There's something so mysterious about the darkest evening of the year between the woods and frozen lake. So then it continues. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. So the horse is encouraging him, come on, let's go back to the village. And then the final stanza, which is perhaps the most important. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. It's a conflict between longing to stay in nature with the snow and the woods and the darkness, as opposed to normal life where you have promises to keep, you have obligations, he has things to go home for, as opposed to that deep longing to stay with the woods that are lovely, dark, and deep. The longing for the darkness, the longing for the depth, the longing for the snow falling. So the question then becomes, what does that last stanza really mean? He's longing for the woods, but he has obligations elsewhere in the village. The woods and the darkness and the snow and the depth of the wood, dark and deep. Does that represent some kind of mystery that he doesn't have in his normal life? Or is it the longing for death, for that eternal sleep? Are those obligations too much to keep? So let's say that the woods represent death, or even some kind of really deep mystery, that going into the woods somehow equals sleep. So I have promises to keep. And that means that I have a long way to go before I can give myself that relief of going to sleep, whether that's death or not. And we don't really know it. And I don't think it's a morbid poem. I think it is the alluring, almost siren call of that darkness, as opposed to the calling of the promises to keep, the calling of going back to the normal life. But again, you just read it, it seems like it's just a man stopping and it's snowing, and that's really lovely. But there's so much more in it, because I think whether you read that miles to go before I sleep, whether we then associate that with death or just associate it with going into a dreamlike mystical experience, he's longing to go into that, the mystery of that darkness. But he can't afford to do that because he has promises to keep. I don't know. And I think it's very nice that you don't have to sort of settle for one interpretation of it.
Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed your espresso break and learned something new. If you're eager to dive deeper into the world of stories and ideas, be sure to hit the follow button in Spotify or the plus button in Apple Podcasts so that you get each new episode straight to your podcast app. You can also visit us at Stories Cafe. Just go to stories-cafe.com. There you can explore free content for a taste of what we offer, or if you're ready for more, a paid membership unlocks in-depth discussions, full access to our archives, and a vibrant community of fellow story enthusiasts. I am so thrilled to have you here, and I look forward to welcoming you back to the Stories Cafe soon.